Okay, let's see if that works. Yeah, that works. Well, thank you for staying so long. It's Friday. It's the last program in our extensive conference. And the theme was quite, when the light went off, I thought that's actually part of the conference title, because it's the power of libraries in an uncertain world. And I think the lighting was also uncertain. And if I look at the keynotes we had, there's always a little bit of gloom in it. So let me just go back to the first day when we had Kenneth Rudd here, who was talking about the future of open science, but also its limits. And he ended with a very positive note that the system is not broken. That evokes some discussion. But I still want to say the system is not broken. We are all here. We are all part of this system, and we are not broken, aren't we? So the second keynote, that was yesterday, we had Patrick Weil here, who was talking about how to bring libraries into conflict zones. So we remember the idea boxes, I think it was idea or power boxes, I don't remember. I think idea boxes where you can transport libraries, actually a public library, into a conflict zone, and what a power that unfolds. And now today we are coming to another topic, the last topic, which is about it's called the Global Assault on Research Libraries, but don't be afraid, there is a lot about the power of libraries in it as well. So I have the great pleasure to introduce Jemimah Steinfeld for you today. We had the chance to meet yesterday when we were queuing for the Rockheim, and immediately we got into a discussion, and if there hadn't been other colleagues to whisk us away, we would still be talking about this issue. We will hear a lot about, well, no, I won't say what we will hear about, because I think we will hear that and we will discuss that later. Jemimah, you told me you studied history, you have an expertise on China, and you also published a book. And the book, if I recall it right, is about little emperors and material girls and sex and youth in China. Is that right? Okay. So, so the Chinese expertise is there, but you made your way, maybe because of that, into censorship. And censorship, not that you exercise censorship, but you index censorship. You're monitoring censorship, and you are CEO of the Index on Censorship, a UK-based NGO, which is reporting on freedom of expression. I think this is one of the main topics for libraries these days, and I'm really happy that you are here and talk about this. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, David, for that introduction. Pleased to know that I'm going to bring some of the gloom to the end of your conference, but hopefully it won't be all gloom, though I have to say it probably is about 2/3 gloom. So, clicker, let me get my clicker, feel very professional. This is Index on Censorship. I don't know who in this room knows about Index on Censorship. We are stocked in many libraries, research libraries. We are published by Sage, so you might have come across us. But if not, here's a little brief thing of what we are. So we were founded in the height of the Cold War. We were founded when a group of dissident protesters, academics typically, went to Red Square to protest in '68 the invasion of then Czechoslovakia by Russia, and they were all arrested and they were thrown into prison, etc., sometimes thrown into psychiatric wards because, heavens forbid, if you like democracy, you must be crazy. And they actually somehow managed to send a telegraph to the Times saying that they wanted the world to know what was happening to them. And our response, a group of writers and scholars, responded by a few years later by saying, we're going to do better than that. We're going to publish a magazine that's entirely devoted to the plight of censored people around the world. We'll publish your stories, we'll publish reports about what's happening. So, 54 years later, we have an award-winning magazine at the heart, as well as a campaigning organization around the magazine. And we're stocked in thousands of universities around the world. So that's just a little bit of background as to why Index does what it does, who we are. And as David kindly said, I have a background in terms of China, but I've been at Index on Censorship for 10 years now. I have been a little bit censored in China, yes. I've been a little bit censored on other things. So I have experience of censorship myself, but I also have been tracking censorship for a decade now. And I am obviously passionate that freedom of expression is the lifeline of democracy, and I am passionate that academic freedoms, of which the libraries sit at the heart, are one of the central pillars of that. So, I'm aware I'm preaching to the choir here. I've got a bunch of librarians in the room, which is a wonderful place to be. Libraries full stop are special places. Whether it's your local community library, your school library, or your university library, they are undoubtedly special places. Anyone who loves books, and lots of people love books, you know they fizz with them. It is exciting walking into a library. It's almost a juxtaposition because they're so quiet and yet they're so exciting. Libraries do all of the above. They preserve memory, they enable verification, support dissent, inquiry. Academic freedom depends on them. I have many personal experiences of libraries. I remember going into a library and finding that book that completely changed my dissertation. It gave me the access, the story that I needed that took it from a mediocre one to a really good one. I remember going into libraries and reading about gender and being forced to kind of confront some of the things I always thought I had grown up with. I remember going into a library and reading about the fact that towards the end of each Chinese dynasty, all of the materials that had been gathered by that dynasty, when the dynasty was falling, the next dynasty would take over and they would get all those materials and they would supposedly put them into huge bonfires and get rid of it all the research, hundreds of years of research. And they would sometimes execute the keepers of those research hubs. I also remember reading that might not be entirely the case, that might have been exaggerated. That is what happens in the library, whether it is a digital library or a physical library, though for the purpose of this discussion, I'm talking about both, because they both today work in tandem. The sad truth is that everyone knows libraries are special, and that is why they get assaulted. As they say, the cliche, knowledge is power. Whoever holds the knowledge holds the power. So, as much as I love libraries and want to protect them, other people probably hate libraries precisely for the reasons that I've been talking about. So, I wanted to take a closer look today at exactly what is happening here. And I have come up with different areas in which I think libraries are being attacked, and with that, knowledge is being attacked. I'm going to start off with a simple caveat, that it's hard to know exactly the true scale. And this is something that happens with censorship all the time. People don't always tell you. They're embarrassed, or the entire nature of censorship is suppression. So I probably only know 1/10 of what is happening out there. So, please, one thing is, please come to me if you have stories and anecdotes. I'll ask that at the end again. But, I want to do that as a strong caveat, that this is a problem that I reckon goes far beyond what I'm going to tell you. This is just what I know. So, a basic thing is to restrict, erase, destroy. So over 28,000 items, for example, of English language content have been restricted in China, according to 2024 stats. The Chinese government under Xi Jinping has taken a turn. I mean, it was never been a free government. The CCP have always controlled what people think, but it's taken a turn towards a huge amount of control under Xi Jinping, which has also been particularly marked because this has happened at the same time that universities have set up branches in China too. So as China has become more open, the knowledge and Western and different universities around the world have undergone partnerships with China. At the same time, they've actually become more aggressive in what they allow to be shown at their libraries. Naturally, this is not everything. They have their topics that they don't like. The 3 Ts, Tiananmen, Taiwan, Tibet, Cultural Revolution. In sobering instances, you do have some of the big journals who will occasionally go along with this. I don't want to judge the reasons that led to this, but obviously it's not the most helpful. So Cambridge University Press removed over 300 journal articles, apparently. Springer Nature is the more famous one. They suppressed a further 1,000 articles that feature keywords Tiananmen, Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong via their online platforms. Whenever I look at an autocratic state, as China obviously is, you're going to find a similar story. So I have looked at Saudi Arabia, Iran, all these places, they're all similar stories. Whatever is the government, tricky areas, they're going to try and restrict information. I didn't bother doing things like North Korea and Eritrea because what is even the point? But what is interesting, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that this is not just something that happens in an autocratic, authoritarian setting. We've also seen it recently coming from, say, the USA. So the Pentagon ordered all military academies and branches to review and eliminate books and materials related to gender ideology and DEI concepts. The US Naval Academy removed nearly 400 books from its library, and West Point disbanded student-led clubs focused on race, gender, and ethnicity. Federal agencies have also removed 8,000 web pages and 3,000 data sets on LGBTQ, health, reproductive rights, climate change. The targets are very obvious. Nevertheless, this is really frigging devastating. There has been pushback, and I can talk about the pushback later, so that is reassuring. The CDC paused publications, restricted access, but there has been some have been reinstated, fortunately, but not all. So restricting, erasing, destroying the records is your classic thing to do if you don't like something. An index knows all too well about this. In 2018, 115 articles from our archive on SAGE were removed in China, some of which naturally mentioned Tiananmen Square. So what did we do? Well, there wasn't a huge amount we could do on a level. We could not get them back into China. We're not in China. We can't make those decisions. This is coming from high up. But what we could do was this. We made our archive until this point was behind a paywall. And we made our archive free. So we did open access. That means that if you're a Chinese student studying in Tsinghua or something in Beijing, you still can't access our articles. They're blocked. But if you have a VPN, you now can. You don't have to pay yourself for a private subscription. You can access our archives. It was a small FU to the Chinese government, and hopefully it's worked. There is something else that happens, which I'm kind of putting as attacking the knowledge infrastructure. So this is, it might not be your typical censor with a red pen who sat in an office getting scratchy about gender or Tiananmen being written down. This is a different form of attack, but these attacks, which I put in different categories, are equally punishing, if not sometimes more. Actually, just to go back. So, as you can see, that is the scientific library in Ukraine that has been shelled by Russia. And so I'll talk about destruction of the library space as the first thing. One of the things that we saw when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine was that they were singling out cultural spaces. So they were bombing museums and concert halls. They were also bombing libraries, and they were ransacking libraries too. So you would see shelves, books that had been taken out that were related to Ukraine national identity. So this is not obviously the only place it's happening. As UNESCO said, one of the most devastating acts of destruction of library collections in human history happened in 2014 at the University of Mosul, which was destroyed by ISIS. Again, we have seen in Gaza all of the universities being fully or partially destroyed, and with that, their libraries. You could say this just happens in war. I personally think these are more targeted. I especially think in the case of Russia, but I would think that it was probably in the case of what's happening in Gaza and certainly what happened with ISIS. Because again, for all the reasons I stated, libraries are special. If you want to get at a people, if you want to eliminate a people, if you want to eliminate a culture, eliminate their libraries. The second thing is cyber attacks, which incidentally, sadly, Index was subject to this week. You'll all be familiar with the fact that the British Library was hit by a devastating ransomware attack a couple of years back, and 600 gigabytes of data were stolen, large parts of the server were destroyed, and the institution, they refused to pay the ransom, and sensitive data was leaked. It was pretty awful and had the British Library on its knees for a very long time. That, to me, seems like not necessarily directed specifically to crush the library itself, but as these are chances. But nevertheless, you can get both chances. It can still have the same effects, but also states will potentially, this could be these are vulnerabilities, and I'm sure you're all aware. So that is certainly something, again, which we're seeing as a potential risk. Relocations. Libraries being forced to relocate. We've seen this in quite a few instances. In Russia, sensitive historical documents, particularly concerning the darker aspects of Stalin period, because apparently Putin wants to rehabilitate Stalin's reputation, have allegedly been relocated outside Moscow to prevent accidental access and unsanctioned access. In Georgia, KGB and Communist Party records have been relocated to remote locations, and researchers now must pay large fees for copies of documents. These aren't trivial. Paying large fees, having to go out of your way to find information, these are barriers. Needless bureaucracy. This is a slightly more intriguing one, and consider this maybe one of my bugbears, but in the UK, for example, the king or queen, and then the two heirs to the throne are exempt from freedom of information requests. That means you can't actually access archives on a lot of things to do with them. So I have spent a lot of time with some very frustrated historians who can't get decent stories from the archives because of what I consider to be needless bureaucracy. This means that things like former Prince Andrew's story, even though he wasn't one of the three exempt, because he was always in contact with them, there was lots of stuff that historians couldn't get. We might have known a bit more about what was happening with Epstein and Prince Andrew if the historians had been able to, and researchers and journalists had been able to access the archives, but we couldn't. And you'll find that bureaucracy repeated in other instances. Cultural crosshairs. So I wasn't entirely sure whether to call it cultural crosshairs. You could call it political crosshairs. But this basically is what I would use to sum up what happened on the 9th of June in 2025, when the Harvard Educational Publishing Group abruptly cancelled the release of a journal series from and on Palestine. They cited inadequate ethical review process. That might well be the truth. But I can't help but look at what was happening in the broader atmosphere. At places like Harvard, they were being torn apart by arguments around Israel-Palestine. Was this journal series inadequate, the editorial process? Or was it that it was going to be too much hassle, too politically sensitive, too culturally sensitive to publish? I don't know. They're not going to admit to it. But it definitely raises the question. Following on from the cultural crosshairs is the kind of the broader environment of discrediting and delegitimizing. The colleges and universities have become dominated by Marxist maniacs and lunatics, said Donald Trump. People in this country have had enough of experts, said Michael Gove. There are no liberals anymore, there are only communists, said Viktor Orban. Well, this, again, when you attack knowledge, you attack the people who have the knowledge. You create the environments in which all the other attacks I've just spoken of become easier to do. And you also end up in places where, for example, in Belarus, the publication of archival documents has been designated as extremist activity. Extremist, because, it's similar to Viktor Orban, who obviously did a huge amount of damage to universities in the country. When you call people communists, when you call them extremists, etc., you diminish their profession. You diminish the materials that they work with. So, common threads. I mean, look, these are lots of different actors. And I will say here, I haven't talked about students. I have heard that sometimes it can be a student complaining of offensive material, but I don't know how widespread that is, so I haven't put them on this list. But again, if you have anecdotes that you want to tell me, if you have pressure, and I do know that, for example, in the UK, there is pressure that comes from Chinese students, for example. So I haven't included them in this, but that was just because I was looking at the ones that I felt had been particularly pronounced and where I was very confident that these were the trends. So, look, not all actors are the same. Some are governments, like the CCP. Some are political movements, like ISIS. Some are hackers. Some of the commercial actors, like Harvard, who are responding to pressure. I should say Harvard University Educational Publishing Group here, just in case I suddenly have Harvard annoyed at me, which could happen. I have Cambridge University a little bit annoyed at me at the moment. So, but of course, whatever the player, the outcome is similar or the same. Less access, less plurality, less evidence, less capacity for independent thought. I wanted to zoom out here. As I spoke about at the beginning, libraries are special, whether they are research libraries or your local library. They are, in many ways, a continuum. The research library is the place that is the ultimate one. It's the place that you end, but you start your journey potentially going with your parents to a little singing class at your local library. You really embed your journey at your school library. And so I wanted to talk about the attacks that libraries are facing more broadly, which is an area that Index has taken a particularly leading role on. So, in places like the US, book banning has become huge in school libraries. It's a really, really big problem, especially in Republican voting states. Plenty of libraries and librarians are having their books challenged, and there are even laws now against stocking certain books in places like Florida. This is slightly different. The impact is still the same in terms of you are diminishing knowledge to different perspectives, access to different perspectives, to knowledge, etc. But it does have a slightly different flavor. So instead of it being, say, the Chinese government, typically it's actually the pressure comes from parents. It still comes from a sense, again, that a book is dangerous. But it will be usually the parents who will complain on behalf of their kid, or probably not on behalf of the kid. The kid probably wants access to the book, is the truth. It will be the parents. These are typically conservative parents, though not exclusively, but they are most typically religious and or conservative parents. Sometimes it also comes from religious lobby groups, and sometimes it does come from political people who represent political leanings too. We've been tracking this for a while, and this trend has been growing. Ever since I've been at Index, it's become bigger and bigger. When I first started, we were the UK lead on Banned Books Week, which happens in October, and it was an issue that was happening in the US. It wasn't huge, but it was certainly quite big then. It wasn't massively happening outside, save for the fact that you can talk about book banning. I mean, of course it was happening outside in terms of, you know, if you go to Bangladesh, there were publishers who were being massacred at their desk. Salman Rushdie was being attacked. There were all kinds, China bans plenty of books. So there was all that. But in terms of this going into the libraries itself, this was very much felt like an American issue that was happening. It is sadly not the case anymore. We are starting to see it in the UK, in fact. We did an investigation in 2024 which saw that these tactics, this fear of books around queer identities, books around race, these books around feminism, climate, all those kind of culture war issues, for want of a better expression, they were being targeted. They were being targeted in different ways, or for different reasons. So in the areas that now have more prominent reform voters, this rising political party that's on the far right, they were attacking typically the LGBTQ books, but equally, if it was in a school that had a religious leaning, be it Catholic or Muslim, they would not want books that had sexual nature. We were concerned that it was growing, and that led to us, the Banned Books Week coalition that we led in the UK was on hiatus because of the pandemic. And we reprised the role last year on the back of our 2024 study because we thought, well, we want to be on the front foot, not the back foot. It's growing here. As part of that role, my colleague, Katie Dancy-Downs, met a librarian at a conference. This was earlier this year, and what she told us absolutely shocked us. The librarian told us that what had happened was a book by Laura Bates, who is a feminist in the UK, called Men Who Hate Women, had caused a parent to go in and complain. She felt that this book, she didn't want her teenage son to read this book because she felt that he would feel confronted. The exact person who probably should be reading the book would feel confronted. So the principal of the school messaged the librarian and said, please remove the book. The librarian was annoyed because, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here, librarians are the experts on what they create in their own library. They bring in books for reasons. They carefully consider all choices, and they make sure generally that things are appropriate in appropriate areas, age appropriate, etc. But nevertheless, she went along with it. Then there was a very interesting twist, an AI twist. The head teacher got a bit giddy on power or something. She put into AI the school library list catalogue, and she put in Laura Bates' Men Who Hate Women, and she said, tell me similar books that we should remove. And AI sputtered out a list of up to 200 books. There is a funny element. If you read the reasons, the very robotic reasons, it's absurd. There's things like the Twilight series, because lest the children hear about vampires, apparently it promoted vampire eroticism or something. There was Dan Brown, because, he's offended the Catholic Church. There was Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood's always on these lists, poor Margaret. Michelle Obama's biography, I mean, it tied together the most motley crew, but the head teacher insisted these books had to go. And then she wasn't just happy there. She then called the librarian in and to her office and said that we think you're a safeguarding risk to your students for stocking books that are aimed at teenagers. And I should add, she actually had the older ones in a separate room that was named Room 101 after the, or 401, after the Orwell thing. So she hadn't even just put them out there for the 11-year-olds. You know, she had done everything that a good librarian does. But she was hauled up, told she was a safeguarding risk, and basically, essentially, lost her job. Since we published that story in March, we have started to hear of similar things happening. So sadly, this is not an isolated case. Okay, so that's the gloom. You're done with the gloom now. I often say about working at Index on censorship that I work on the worst stories, but with the best people. And it really, really is true. I work with all the people who are fighting back, all the brave, courageous, etc. individuals. And there are many organizations that are doing amazing things. I wanted to mention two things that I heard about that I just thought were pretty funky. They're not to do with libraries, but I just think they're quite interesting from a perspective of people who work with digital archives. I reported on a case out of Hong Kong where Apple Daily, which was one of the most critical opposition newspapers, with Jimmy Lai, who is a media mogul who's currently in jail in Hong Kong serving a very, very long sentence. I think it's a life sentence. He is basically the Chinese government's enemy number one. And when he was arrested, as were his colleagues, the Hong Kong authorities moved to dismantle all of Apple Daily, and obviously that's a really rich resource of what had happened in Hong Kong democracy over the 20, 30 years that it was in business. So apparently people were using blockchain to put the archive up. I don't entirely understand blockchain. I've had to watch quite a few videos. I'm still not entirely sure I understand it. But nevertheless, apparently it is very hard to, basically impossible to remove something, to access something, and therefore remove it once it's on blockchain. So that was really great. I know that also, following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but even before that, people have been trying in Russia to also use different things, different digital models to protect newspapers there as well, including the Russia Independent Media Archive. But when it comes to the research library, I think my favorite, and obviously I'm biased because it's China, but is Ian Johnson's China Unofficial Archives. This site is dedicated to making accessible the key documents, films, blogs, and publications of a movement of Chinese people seeking to reclaim their country's history. Unlike official government or university archives, the China Unofficial's Archives is open, free, and accessible to anyone from any walk of life. If anyone's interested in China or just in general the preservation of research, I think he has a newsletter. The China Unofficial Archives have a newsletter. Each week I get delivered to my inbox a piece of research, a historical resource that has been rescued from oblivion. They translate it and they send it to our inbox. Obviously, in terms of the broader atmosphere, we lead the Banned Books Week Coalition. There are lots of people in the coalition. There are lots of organizations like that, lots of people who genuinely care and are grouping together. There are also some campaigns against book banning in terms of there are leading publishers and authors who are suing Florida over the book ban law. I think this is great. I commend Penguin's one of them. I think is one of the leaders. I completely commend them. What I would say is that it is much harder to fight a lawsuit than to just stop the trend to begin with. So that's what we're always trying to do in the case of the UK, at least. We're trying to make sure that book banning does not become systematic in the way it has in the US, because we really don't want to end up in court fighting a government over it, where we will incur costly fees. But nevertheless, people aren't just going, okay, fine, yeah, ban the books. They are not. So that is great. So in terms of guiding principles, I think strong institutional commitments to intellectual freedom, that probably seems like a bit of a duh here, but I think sometimes I know that from what I've seen can happen in the university sector, people have over the years been confronted by people saying, how dare you stock that book, it's so offensive, how dare you do this, how dare you do that, and universities aren't there to be cozy, nice places, they're there to challenge. So I think commitments to intellectual freedom, because, and you know, ditto when it's the state, etc., you've got to make that message really, really clear that this isn't about books that everyone's going to like. This isn't about research that everyone's going to like. But that is precisely the point. I think having clear policies, transparency and complaint mechanisms, for example. So if books or research is being challenged, if people want to do that, there is a system in which they can do it if they have to, and that system therefore can reject why they've done it. You know, so if they come to you and they say, well, I think you should remove this research because there's factual inaccuracies, you can go and research, and then whether that's true, and then you can say yes or no. But if the reason is because for political reasons, you can go, well, that, you know, is against these policies. Transparency is key, as said. A lot of this is happening behind closed doors, and we don't know the full extent, but I think organizations and institutions should be transparent. There should be some way of them being able to log when they come under pressure. Professional solidarity. I mean, I think solidarity more broadly, this is one of the things I always reiterate. In my job, as said, I meet these amazing people, and I'm always thinking, how did you become so courageous? And I think one of the components of courage is solidarity. Autocracy is about making people feel alone. If you speak to anyone who, you know, there's a reason people go into solitary confinement, it's to make you feel alone. If you speak to any political prisoner or dissident, they will tell you very similar things. They will say, the authorities would say, you're nothing. No one cares about you. No one's thinking about you. And if they know that that's not true, if they know that there are other people who have their back, that means a lot. On a professional setting, if you're all in it together, it makes it far harder to be isolated and for bad things to happen, essentially. Distributed archives, making sure that no archive is in one single place, which is one of the things we've seen coming out of Gaza and the West Bank, is this move to try and make sure that it's not all just in that location, so that the knowledge doesn't get lost where the war is. Digital preservation is obviously key. I mean, I personally think both is key, both the kind of the physical books and the digital counterpart. Ideally, you have both, but you should at least aim for both, because then if one gets destroyed, if a website gets blocked, you have the book. If the book gets destroyed, you have the website. So kind of digital, so backup. Cybersecurity investment. It's really boring, it's really tedious, it's really expensive, but we sadly need it. Collaboration, international networks for the similar reason around solidarity, but also for knowledge sharing and cross-border partnerships. Sitting down with librarians and asking what's happened to them, what their reflections are, what they can do. Again, telling organizations like Index, if you have experiences, so that we can chart it and we can, as through our networks, let other people know. And, again, support each other, support bilateral organizations. Albert Einstein, it's a fairly obvious one to quote. The only thing that you absolutely have to know is the location of the library, indeed. But if I was going to quote someone else, or paraphrase at least, I I always quite like the 20th century scholar Karl Popper, who said that you learn not by accumulating absolute certainties, but by critically engaging with ideas and eliminating error. When the research library is working well, it is that. It is the place that you go to be challenged. When the research library is not working well, it's obviously the opposite of that. I have listed a lot of different negative things that are happening in terms of the broader space. Obviously, there are plenty of libraries around the world that are not experiencing these. I am seeing things through the lens of censorship, so I'm not going to sit here and say everything's great. Certainly, I think we need to be on the front foot and aware. But I also think that I'm speaking to a room of people, hundreds of people who've come to a conference to all be together with their colleagues and their community. And I think that there is a lot of goodwill. You all love your profession. We need you. And I think that then the road ahead could be potentially rocky, but I also think with people being aware of what the challenges are, as well as working together, we should weather all these worst storms, the gloom that I've outlined, and still have a thriving research community. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jemimah, for all these thoughts, all the doom and gloom, and all the hope as well that you gave us. But I think during your speech, I had loads of questions, and I hope that many of us had loads of questions. And we have the angels in yellow again, who come to you if you raise your hand. If you raise your hand, if you get the microphone, please tell your name and affiliation.
I'm Christina Jones from Indiana University, and I really appreciate your talk today. I have many personal connections and professional and scholarly connections to what you spoke about, so I'm going to make this really short, and I'd love to connect with you later. But something that I think would be of interest to everyone, just from what I've seen at this conference, is the resistance from academic librarians when the Trump administration took down those data sets. There was a small army of rebels and resistors, and they created a really speedy and nimble group called the Data Rescue Project. And so these librarians, including a colleague of mine at Indiana University, her name is Michaela Narlock, took the initiative and scraped the internet and grabbed that data and made sure that it was locked down and it was still available for researchers. So I could go on at length, and I will not because I've already spoken today. But there is a lot of unknown, I guess, invisible resistance happening that I'd love to share more about.
Thank you, by the way. I love that. So thank you, and I'd love to, catch up later.
Yes.
That's working. Okay, try that. Hi, so I'm Stephen Wyber from the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. Two sort of half questions. I think that the first one, we have seen a number of US states' efforts to actually create anti-book banning laws. And so building on existing library legislation that may exist, actually how do you strengthen that? So it'd be interesting to hear about whether you think, is it time that we start pushing for that? The second half is that there is a big focus right now on broader academic and research freedom within Europe, and indeed it's going to feature in a piece of legislation that's due out towards the end of this year, the European Research Area Act. Do you see possibilities for libraries to actually start engaging in that broader debate around academic research freedom and being part of that rather than each fighting our own battles?
Thank you very much. So in terms of question one, there are, I think it's maybe Iowa and Ohio, one of the two. There are places where people are trying to create anti-book banning legislation, which we really, really welcome and which is great to see the fight back. Like as said at the start, it's really, really hard. So it's, in the case of the US, if that's what you have to do, I think, to make sure that the library systems are not attacked further, then that's really good. Ideally, you want to be able to stop things before it gets to that stage. We are looking ourselves at Index into a way in which we can try and enshrine kind of some form of protection mechanism at the moment to libraries in the UK, because they are ultimately, you know, the librarian I spoke about in Manchester, she was completely powerless to what happened to her. And so we want to have some form of commitment, be it at a very high political level or just administered through things like CILIP, where libraries sign up to a charter which essentially safeguards their collections and the librarians themselves in this respect. In terms of the second question, I mean, that it's obviously protecting academic freedom and a move towards the conversations that we've had recently. I can't speak for the whole of Europe, I can only speak to the UK. You know, I think we welcome conversations around academic freedom. Academic freedom is really important. Oh, sorry. Probably the Chinese government, by the way. So, hi. Hi, Xi Jinping. I think it's really, really important because for all the reasons stated, academic freedom is incredibly fundamental, and there are attacks to the academic system in the UK that we've seen. I mean, I would say that actually some of the most egregious attacks come from foreign states. So transnational repression that happens at the hands of Iran or China or Saudi Arabia, etc. That's kind of some of the most egregious. But of course, there have been some instances of people being caught up in the culture wars, which has not been great. But at the same time, that's been one of the problems with what we've been seeing with the legislation in the UK, is it has been a little bit caught up in the culture wars. And I could talk for ages about the current, the Act, the Academic Freedom Act that got passed a couple of years ago. But I think for the sake of the fact we've got 13 more minutes, I won't. I think there's lots to commend, but I also think there are some significant flaws with it. However, I think kind of the fact that it reiterates the importance of plurality of thought, of the idea that universities are these spaces that are meant to be challenged. I think that given that all ends in the library, all roads lead to the library, and universities, if you're in the arts and humanities, which was the driving force behind some of these behind this University Act, I think that's a good thing so I think it will be good for research libraries in that respect. Yeah.
Please, thank you very much.
Cameron Nayland, thanks for a great talk. I wanted to get your thoughts on an issue which I think is particularly germane to this community, which is sort of theft of identity through metadata. So the particular example I'm thinking of... Sorry? Oh, sorry. Closer to the mouth. Okay. So thinking about the particular case I'm thinking of is that there were journals published out of universities in Crimea and what is now Russian-controlled areas in Ukraine, where the ISSNs then, according to the rules, formally fell under control of the occupying forces. I'm sure this has happened in other places. So the Russian government was able to take control over the means of communication, the journals themselves. And there's been a process of trying to resolve this. But one, I guess I was interested in, does that fit, where might that fit into the sort of classes of action on censorship? You're talking about taking control of voices. And are there other examples of international bodies where we might take inspiration on how to harden our systems to prevent that kind of co-option, the sort of theft of identity and authority of systems, and other good examples of hardening against that in other places?
So if I follow, because I'm not familiar with the case, if I follow the issue, have the words been changed in the papers and all the authors' names changed?
It wasn't so much about papers, though I think some of the archives were then destroyed.
Okay.
But it was more about the control of what had been Ukrainian journals then starting to publish from what were now Russian-controlled universities. So it's the content and the authority of the voice or the authority of the venue as a means of controlling a narrative.
I mean, if it's not removed, obviously there have been big discussions in the academic world about working with Russia, to which I think more often than not, professors and things have decided that it was still better to work with Russia for the sake of knowledge sharing, because ultimately if you isolate countries, it becomes even worse. I mean, I suppose it comes to an ethical question about whether an institution is happy with the fact that that has been co-opted and stolen, basically, essentially. Index is always of the view that, it's still better to have things than not. So I would rather... Well, look, I don't want to be quoted here because, to be honest, I haven't actually given that specific moral dilemma enough thought. But I suppose it is a question, is it better to have something that has been stolen but is still out there versus that thing just being completely destroyed? The ideal situation is the third one, that thing's not stolen and it's still out there. I'll leave it up to the audience to decide what they think is the best scenario morally.
Yeah, John.
Hello, Jonathan White, University of Essex, UK.
Bit closer, please.
Yeah, sorry. One of the key factors for me that's happening at the moment is around financial control of universities and of research. And this is happening across Europe, but particularly in the UK right now. We are seeing a big reduction in public funding of research of universities. I think I saw an article a few weeks ago, universities in the UK have lost 10,000 staff through redundancies over the last 18 months to 2 years. But aside from that as well, public funding of research is very much going towards a new industrial strategy in the UK, so we're getting far more militaristic, science and technology based. There is seemingly attacks, both direct and indirect, on the humanities, the social sciences, arts and culture. I was just wondering if indexing censorship, I know you will be aware of these issues, but are you tracking them in particular and the effects that they will have over the next few years, maybe even over a decade, on possibly a reduction in the amount of research that's coming out in those areas, a lack of pluralistic thought in them, maybe directed in very narrow terms going forward?
Yes, great question as well. I mean, we are tracking that, and I have two different, slightly unrelated thoughts, I suppose, in terms of that. When I talked about some of the challenges with the Academic Freedom Act, one of them is the fact that they are punishing universities with punitive, huge fines if they fall short of their free speech values. And this feels to me quite personally counterproductive because universities are really cash-strapped, and all that's going to do is add to the pressures on universities. I said they weren't related, but this potentially goes to the second point, which one of the main things that we are tracking, as said, is the long arm of different states in the UK more broadly or around Europe, but also in academia. There are quite a lot of instances of universities becoming much more reliant on money from places like Saudi Arabia, China, and that has led to research being put on hold. So we had Sheffield Hallam University that paused research by a professor there into what was happening in Xinjiang in China. She then actually took, I think it was the university, to court, the professor, and actually in the end won, and the research is back on track. But if she hadn't been a tenacious professor, she might have just said, fine, I'll just research something else. We also, I said earlier that Cambridge University were a bit annoyed at me at the moment. They there is a case there, and it's an incredibly complicated case, but there was someone who was doing an MPhil at the university, and he had hoped to do his PhD, and it was looking at disappearances in Balochistan, a very contentious area of Pakistan. The university, I think, I know, has some collaborations with Pakistan. This university student was incredibly promising, and his research was, he got to the end of his MPhil, he exceeded. He was a brilliant student. He had professors that were very happy for him to turn his MPhil into a PhD, and he got some death threats from unknown sources, but they think related to Pakistan, and for whatever reason, he has not been able to progress to PhD. The university are distancing themselves from these threats. We don't know the full reason, but we have strong suspicions that it might be because of that. So in terms of the future, I think this all creates kind of a vicious cycle and a race to the bottom. Academic pressures lead to bad decisions. Bad decisions are going to stop. The PhD theses that you would be putting into your libraries of the future, you're not going to have this Balochistan one. You fortunately will still have the Xinjiang one in the instance of Sheffield Hallam, but how many other things like that are going on? I don't know. These are just the cases that we've heard about. So I think the financial situation is incredibly challenging if you don't just want your research libraries to be these kind of ossified, static spaces of collections from 5 years ago, or you don't just want them to be full of, unchallenging material that doesn't ruffle the feathers of a more belligerent government.
We have time for 2 very short questions and 2 short answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Hilary Bassell. I'm an associate professor and librarian at Ohio State University, so next to Indiana. And I'm actually in the middle of a research study right now of the effects of these state-level anti-DEI and higher ed laws on academic librarians. And I wondered if you've looked, in addition to book bans, at the impact of censorship on academic librarians' speech, because what I'm finding is that academic librarians in these states are being told that they can't do certain types of activities anymore, certain types of outreach activities. Across the board, what I'm finding is people are being told to take down particular words from their websites and from their research guides and things like that. So in addition to the book bans, there are these other types of censorship mandates coming down as well.
Fast answer response. We've only done a little bit. We would love to do more. That's horrific. And please talk to me afterwards.
Thank you very much. And the last question.
David Prosser from Research Libraries UK. Thank you so much for all the fabulous and very, very vital work that you do. I had a quick question about the scholarly publishers and their censoring of material that they're selling into China. You have here in the room a huge number of customers of those publishers with a certain amount of financial clout. What would you like us to do in these circumstances?
So what would I like you to do to
help encourage some of those publishers to perhaps rethink their policies?
Take them out for lunch, get them drunk and tell them off?
Oh, I can do that.
Look, it's really, really hard because the Chinese, these are very, very strong players, and these are constant. If I'm being empathetic, these are, I've met lots of academic publishers, and I know that they're making these these choices, and I think what quite often happens is they decide we would rather a little bit, we would rather 96% of our archive is in this country than 0%. If we take the principal position at 0%, we can't have 100% in, and so we think that 96% is better. Again, I think that's actually in some ways like a moral question as to, is it better? I think being open and transparent with these publishers and saying, well, why have you got here? And again, it probably goes down to the solidarity. It might be that if you could get all these publishers in the same room and they could all universally say, you know, if you could convene something, thinking on the spot here, convene a meeting with the journals and say, look, you're all getting this pressure. If one of you folds, it makes it harder for the others. But if all of you together say to the Chinese libraries and universities, actually, we're not, and do you really want to have all of the English language journals suddenly not in your country? Because that's the alternative, is you can punish them in that way. Maybe one journal they won't miss, but if suddenly all the journals aren't there, then it will. So I think there are things like that, but that does involve energy, organization, and a little bit of bravery, but the bravery involves the solidarity, so you know, you've got some work to do.
Well, thank you. I think you ended with the right term, solidarity. I was just thinking about how to paraphrase the motto of this year's conference. I would say, yes, we live in uncertain time, but don't underestimate the power of the libraries. Jemimah Steinfeld, thank you very much for this speech. And now I have the pleasure to hand over for the closing ceremony to our president, Kianis Tsakonas.
Okay, thank you very much for your patience. We needed a few minutes to self-organize. This is the closing ceremony of our conference, and I would like to thank everybody who came to the very, very beautiful Trondheim. And I think that the weather was an ally, because when I saw the forecast last week, it was all about rain. I had my raincoat here. I only needed this once. We have very, very beautiful days. I'm very, very afraid to go back to Greece. So it was a very stimulating conference as ever. Can we have the slides, please? It was, as you saw, as you witnessed yourselves, a very crowded conference, one of the better attended conferences in the recent history of LIBER, if not the one with the highest attendance. And this picture that we hope that we will see, not this, not this. But it had to be. Okay. But this picture, you know, is a true evidence that we had an amazing conference, a lot of sessions, many submissions coming, many submissions were accepted, a lot of workshops, a lot of discussions, a very engaging strategy development session. A lot of things happened, and they happened also because of you. But I have to say that we need your opinion. So can you take out your mobile phone, your smart device, scan this QR code, or go to this URL. It's like Slido and Mentimeter, but it's called AHA Slides. And I think AHA were a Norwegian group, right? You know, in the 80s? Yeah. So can you tell us in one word or two words, how did you find the conference? Good food indeed, very good food. And very long days indeed. Okay. And football, okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. Everything will be taken again into account for the conference program committee, and we hope that next year we will also have an improved program of the conference. I think is Sorry. The conference was a huge success because of you, but it was also a huge success because of our sponsors. Many sponsors, LIBER sponsors, as well as local sponsors, and we would like to thank them very much for their support, and I hope that everybody was engaged in discussions with them and get to know better their services. We would like, of course, to thank our host, NTNU Library, the organizers, and the volunteers. And of course, I would like to invite the director of the NTNU Library, Anna Loken, on stage to thank her again for the very well-organized conference and the very supportive team that she provided. And we are very thankful for you, for everything that you have done, and you delivered a great conference. So please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Yannis. And thank you to LIBER for trusting us with this conference. I think we have had a great week here together with you. And I want to thank you, LIBER community, for the friendliness and inclusiveness that I have experienced. This is my first LIBER conference, and I really felt welcome. And I would also like to thank our sponsors. Thank you very much. But my main thank goes to the angels in yellow, all the volunteers. Without you, this conference wouldn't have happened. And a special thank you for Sølvi, who has, she's the queen.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anna, would you like to call the team here on stage, please, all the volunteers, for a huge round of applause?
Yes, please come down. Excuse me. There's one thing I wanted to tell you. Some of you are walking with the counter how many steps you take during a day. So some of you have been to 20,000 and up. So they work hard.
Thank you. Of course, I would like to thank the LIBER office. Can I ask the colleagues from the LIBER office to stand up to give you again a round of applause? Angela, Henna, Helen, Cheryl. And now to the upcoming LIBER events, which are many. First of all, the LIBER winter event in 2026. We missed one last year, 2025, but now we are reuniting again in the very, very beautiful city of Zagreb, together with the National and University Library in Zagreb, with the theme LIBER in Action, connecting and advocating for research libraries. It is, I think, the 26th and the 27th of November that we will be expecting, members of our community in Zagreb for further collaboration, exploration of topics, and, of course, strategy development. So see you in Zagreb. Now, the LIBER Emerging Leaders Program will open its applications in the autumn. You have the summer to think about it, to go to your libraries and find the support that you need to apply for the cohort number 8. We also have the LIBER Middle Management Training. Again, the applications will open in autumn 2026. And we will be having the Developing Citizen Science Masterclass in Spain, in Madrid, which will be happening in the March of 2027, and the applications will open again in the autumn. So during the autumn, you will receive, through the LIBER mailing and the newsletter, all the updates for the programs. If you are interested in hosting a LIBER event, then it can be the annual conference, it can be the winter event, it can be the LIBER Journées. You can contact the office at this email. Of course, our executive director is always accessible, approachable to discuss with you and listen to your proposals. And the next LIBER conference will be I think it was not a secret. Already.
Take a journey to the first capital city of Roman Britain, which exists today as a growing, diverse and modern city in the southeast of England. This is Colchester. Steeped in thousands of years of history and a key part of the United Kingdom story. Today we're a hub for art, culture and tourism in the east, surrounded by beautiful coastal and rural landscapes, and home to innovators creating the future. Thought the harder, heart the keener. Our motto at the University of Essex, which has been a catalyst for research, innovation and change across its 60-year history. Join us in 2027 at the University of Essex in Colchester to experience a university at the centre of world-leading research. A university where students and academics create new solutions to world problems, and where you can find the world in one place. Explore the award-winning parkland that is home to our campus, the perfect environment for an inspiring and enriching conference. Welcome to Colchester. Welcome to the University of Essex. We look forward to meeting you at the 56th LIBER Conference in 2027.
And this is the moment that I would like to introduce you also to the theme, Research Libraries as a Force for Knowledge Autonomy. And I would like to invite on stage our host, Jonathan White, Director of the Library of University of Essex, to tell us a few things about the next conference. So, John, as it says here, what we can look forward to at the LIBER 2027, but most importantly, can you tell us a few things about your library?
Yes, of course. Firstly to say, I just want to say how enormously honoured and excited we are to be hosting the LIBER conference in 2027 at Essex. Colchester, as you saw, is the historic capital of Roman Britain, so it's actually Britain's oldest city, but it's also one of the newest cities of the United Kingdom, having only achieved city status a couple of years ago. We're in the southeast of England, that's the county of Essex, and we're about 1 hour out of central London. So the city is home to the University of Essex, which opened in 1964, and we're a small to medium-sized university of around 12,500 students, 1,000 researchers, and we're a dual intensive education and research university, one of the plate glass universities that were established in the UK in the 1960s. We have long-established research centres in human rights. For example, our Human Rights Centre is internationally known, and we're home to the UK Data Archive as well. The Albert Sloman Library, which you saw briefly on the video, is at the heart of our campus, and it serves our whole university community. And we also have many external audiences and partners for our art collections, special collections and archives. And that includes the largest open collection of Latin American art in Europe, rare book collections, and also archives of modern time researchers and authors.
Okay. And apart, from hosting us in a very, very green environment, it is one of the greenest universities I've ever been. What else do you plan to offer to our colleagues?
Yes, so Colchester is a small city, but it's growing in size, and it does have a thriving arts and cultural scene. It's a semi-coastal city, as you say, a lot of green space and easy access to the coast. So there's a lot to offer for our guests in 2027. The university itself is campus-based, the lush green campus that you saw, and it's actually award-winning parkland. That's very popular open parkland to the local community, and people come from far and wide to see it as well. It was actually painted by Constable in a very famous painting of Wivenhoe Park. We are a campus-based university, and the university was designed around a central philosophy of living and working together. And we hope to embody that philosophy in the hosting of the conference next year by keeping it on campus and utilising all of that campus space in our hosting of the conference.
So, as a final word of motivation, why should we come to Colchester? Give us the reason.
If I remember back at library school, I did do a marketing module, but I'm not sure I got my best grade in that one. I mean, I'd really just like to offer a really warm invitation to all LIBER participants, people who regularly attend this conference, and to our sponsors as well to come next year to Colchester and the University of Essex and to the UK. It's really important for us all in the UK that we remain connected and in collaboration across Europe. Without mentioning a certain word, we're all aware acutely of the events of the last decade or so. But it really, really is important to us that we continue that community we have across Europe and that participation. So it's really important to us to bring the conference to the UK. It will be the first time since, I believe, 2015 that the LIBER conference has been held in the UK. So you can look forward to the conference taking place in a very beautiful setting. We have a range of modern conference spaces and plentiful and accessible choices of accommodation, both on campus and across the city. And you can expect a very warm welcome to the LIBER community in Colchester next year. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Can I ask Anna to come again on the stage to hand over the hosting duties to John? And this is done by giving the flag of LIBER, Anna, to
Shall I stand?
And good luck.
Thank you.
With the coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Final words, we have the social program. After the lunch, there are several library visits, like the Dragovol Library, Unerus Library, and the Oya Library. We had requested registration, so those who are registered, they have already some confirmation. They have received a confirmation email, so they know the starting times, the meeting points, and you can look there. And we had a teaser before about the ideal library here in NTNU, so you can learn more about the NTNU University Library Roadmap here at 3:30, and it doesn't have to, you didn't have to register, so if you are interested, you just come here and you meet the colleagues from NTNU to explain you about the vision for the future NTNU University Library. Tomorrow we have the Sverresborg Folk Museum tour. Again, it was required to register, and you have received an email with all the information. You can refer to this email about the details. You can continue the discussion. First of all, if you are linked with LIBER on several social media, this is the blue sky, but I saw that several of you are posting on LinkedIn, and this is very encouraging for everybody in the office and for the local host. The discussion went on and on the social media. So you can follow LIBER on the social media, get connected, learn the latest news and the update. If you are not a LIBER member and you are interested in becoming one, there is a free membership until the end of the year if you join right now. Now, the QR code will take you to the conference survey. However, you will receive this link also by email in the forthcoming days, because the survey helps us a lot to improve the conference. And the conference presentations will be uploaded in the forthcoming days or weeks on the collections that we have on Zenodo. So everything that you saw and you want to revisit, you can find it on Zenodo. With that said, I would like to thank you everyone for being part of LIBER 2026, and we hope that we'll see you in Colchester next year. Thank you very much.